Hello, everyone, and Veshtilek. It's my pleasure to welcome you to a special edition of Tibet Talks for Tibetan American youth to engage with U.S. leaders. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we were unable to hold our annual Tibetan Youth Leadership Program in Washington, D.C. this year, so we decided to host this virtual program for a larger youth audience. In this session, we are joined by almost 50 Tibetan American youth, and we're pleased to be able to live stream this event for all our online viewers as well. For this special program, it is our pleasure and honor to welcome two very important and special guests who have well-earned reputations for being tireless champions for human rights and religious freedoms. Their leadership and support are critical aspects that help guide and shape our work for Tibet, and we are always grateful that they keep their doors open for us, always whenever we meet. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Ambassador Sam Brownback, and Congressman Jim McGovern. Congressman, Ambassador, thank you both for joining us. And we hope you'll enjoy this interactive session also. In order for this program to be engaging and interactive, we've invited 5 guest moderators. The first is ICT President Matteo Makachi. So welcome, Matteo.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome, Ambassador. Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you.
And we are also joined by 4 alumni of our youth leadership program for Tibetan American youth. I'd like to welcome all 4 of them. We have Tenzin Pelkey, alumni of 2013, who joins us from Minnesota. She is a senior legislative assistant to Congressman Al Green of Texas and usually based here in DC, but today she's joining us from Minnesota. We have Tenzin Rangjel, alumna of 2015, who joins us from Queens, New York. Rangjel is a recent graduate of Johns Hopkins School of International Studies, and she's currently a researcher with the COVID-19 ethnography lab at SAIS. We have Nima Binara, alumnus of 2001, joins us from Virginia. Nima is counsel at Google, but prior to this, he was counsel for Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont. He has also served on the boards of Students for a Free Tibet, Tibet Justice Center, and the Tibet Fund. And finally, we have Lieutenant Commander Tenzin Changchup, alumni of 2013, who joins us from Navajo Nation, where she's currently stationed. He is a doctor of pharmacy and joined the United States Public Health Service in 2014. We are so pleased to welcome all of you and look forward to hearing from you all. And then I'm happy now to hand over to Matteo to begin the program.
Yes, thank you, Tencho, and I'm really pleased to be able to host this program today. First of all, I want to thank both the ambassador and the congressman for being with us. They are very strong supporters of the Tibetan people. They have been for many, many years, and we know that the Tibetan American youth have been looking at you as models. As this year, as Tencho mentioned, we couldn't organize our Tibet Youth Leadership Program. We thought it would be important to at least find an opportunity for some of our youth who are active all across America, have been engaged with activism, advocacy, but are leaders in their community in many respects, to interact with you. And especially I want to really express my admiration for the 4 panelists that we have today with us. They have shown on their own merit a great leadership among the Tibetan American community. So we are really pleased to have them interact directly with you. So we have a very tight program. We want to run quickly, so I will proceed with a brief introduction of first Ambassador Brownback. Ambassador has been for many, many years a supporter of the Tibetan people, but also in particular an advocate for international religious freedom. I've known him many years back when he was a member of Congress. He's been a governor of Kansas, also a senator, and religious freedom has always been at the center of his work. And now in his role as U.S. ambassador for international religious freedom, I think he has shown very clear leadership in advancing this issue, not only for the United States, but also globally. And maybe he can talk also about of the global initiatives that he has undertaken. On Tibet, he has been very outspoken on many issues that he can talk about, but also he took time last year to travel to Dharamsala and meet personally with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and I think that shows the kind of commitment that he has had. Congressman McGovern is, for Tibetans, probably doesn't need any introduction, but we have viewers out there on Facebook and on our website. He's the chairman of the Rules Committee, currently in the House, a very important committee. He's a member of the Agricultural Committee, but most, directly related to our work, he's also the chairman of the Congressional-Executive Commission on China and co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission on Human Rights. And in that capacity, he has been the main sponsor of a very important bill that passed at the end of 2018, the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act, that was passed by Congress and then signed by the president, and now is the sponsor together again with Senator Marco Rubio in the Senate of the Tibetan Policy and Support Act. I also read in his bio that he started to be an advocate when he was in 7th grade, when he joined a presidential campaign in 1972 for another McGovern, if I'm not wrong, right?
Correct.
And so I think for the Tibetan youth, the Tibetan American youth watching today, probably you may have some advice, on how is it possible to craft a path and a career in public service as you have been able to do. I would like to begin now with the first question and ask for his remarks to Ambassador Brownback. And basically the question is, what is your advice, to the Tibetan American youth who are watching on how they can, those who want to have an influence in U.S. government policy, whether it's related to Tibet or to other issues that are dear to their heart, but specifically how the Tibetan American community and this new generation who are now born here can have an effective influence on the American political system. Ambassador.
Well, thanks, Matteo. Appreciate it. Good to see you again, and good to be with all of the people that are on this line. Congressman McGovern, good to join you as always. He's such a stalwart advocate and a great ally. And these issues are bipartisan issues. There's plenty of things to fight about between the political parties, but not Tibet. And thankfully, this has been one of those issues that there's been a united front. Speaker Pelosi has been one of the longest, best advocates for Tibet I've known, and worked with her for many years on this topic. And I'm glad that people are interested in getting engaged on this. If I could just really kind of boil it all down, to me, the thing all amounts to whether or not you're willing to get engaged and to fight on it. The Tibetan issue has been, unfortunately, around for some period of time. I do think we're at a point now of inflection where advocacy could be really important on the Tibetan issue with this growing divide between the United States and China on a number of different issues. I think Tibet needs to be raised and highlighted as one of those issues of which we think that the Tibetan people need to have more autonomy. They need to be able to practice their faith freely. The Dalai Lama needs to be able to go and return to his homeland if he would so choose. And yet these are all denied. And there's bipartisan support in the Congress that these things would all take place and be allowed. And there's even bills that the congressmen and others have sponsored to put these issues in the forefront. So how does a young person then get engaged with this? I think you find your path in. You do internships on Capitol Hill. You intern at State Department. You get involved in the Free Tibet campaign. And I think you'd find that there's open doors in a number of these places for people with passion and interest and focus to get engaged with these. And one final quick thought. if I could, in this area. I have seen young people in movements change the world. I have seen it happen. And an example would be the invisible children in Uganda. Here was an area where these children were being abducted and taken into armed forces, and a group of college kids basically started a campaign to free them. And it went around the country, and it hit a lot of college campuses, and it took a while, but eventually those children were let free, and that terrain was released from Joseph Kony was the head of the Lord's Resistance Army there that had really captured all these people, and the young people did that. It was their campaign that moved it. So you can do this. This will work. And just don't grow weary, and use the passion and the interest and the energy that you have to push on these topics that you care about. Thanks for letting me join you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for sharing, both your advice and clear passion for these issues that, as you mentioned, they're global issues, and I think are important for the youth worldwide. And I guess there is always an opportunity to make a difference, and I think you have provided some good advice for that. I will now move to Congressman McGovern, who has some remarks for our audience, and then we'll follow up with some questions.
Well, thank you, Matteo, and I want to thank you for your excellent leadership at ICT, and we've worked closely for many years, and I'm proud of all that we've accomplished. It's great to see the graduates of ICT's Tibetan Youth Leadership Program, including Nima Benara, who played a key role in the passage of the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act when he was working for Senator Leahy. I'm glad to join Ambassador Brownback today, who's played an important role for the administration on religious freedom in Tibet and around the world, and I am inspired by so much of his work. And look, our presence here today exemplifies the bipartisan nature, as the ambassador said, in terms of support for these issues. At a time when Democrats and Republicans can't even agree on what to have for lunch, here we are unified in our support for human rights in China and Tibet. And I wish we could be meeting in person today, but I'm looking forward to our virtual discussion. It's always inspiring to see young people mobilize and take action, especially in furtherance of the Tibetan cause. We all know the human rights situation in Tibet sadly continues to worsen. Tibetans are struggling to exercise their basic human rights, to speak and teach their language, protect their culture, control their land and water, travel within and outside of their country, and practice their religion as they choose. The Chinese government continues to seek control over the processes of selection and recognition of Tibetan Buddhist reincarnated teachers, including the Dalai Lama. The Tibet Autonomous Region government passed regulations on ethnic unity that mandate acceptance and promotion of government, ethnic, and religious policy. So let's make no mistake, these policies are part of a systematic effort by Chinese authorities to eliminate the distinct religious, linguistic, and cultural identity of the Tibetan people. And the 11th Panchen Lama, who was abducted with his parents and forcibly disappeared 25 years ago, is still one of the world's longest detained prisoners of conscience. In recent years, the movements and campaigns organized by ICT, Students for a Free Tibet, and Tibetan associations have been instrumental in strengthening U.S. policy to better support the Tibetan cause. The Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act, which I was proud to introduce, was overwhelmingly passed by Congress and signed by the President in 2018. Earlier this year, the House of Representatives passed the Tibetan Policy and Support Act legislation that I authored that would establish a U.S. policy that the succession or reincarnation of Tibetan Buddhist leaders is an exclusively religious matter that should be made solely by the Tibetan Buddhist community. It would specify that Chinese officials who interfere in the reincarnation process will be subject to targeted financial, economic, and visa-related sanctions, including those in the Global Magnitsky Act. And the legislation also strengthens the role of the State Department Special Coordinator. States that there should be no new Chinese consulates in the United States until the establishment of a U.S. consulate in Lhasa, promotes multinational efforts to protect the environment and water resources on the Tibetan Plateau, and supports democratic governance in the Tibetan exile community. And thanks to the strong outside mobilization and engagement of Tibetans, it is my expectation that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will consider this legislation in the coming weeks so that we can send the bill to the president for his signature. And signing this bill into law would send a clear signal on the direction of future U.S. policy toward Tibet that we hope will be replicated internationally. It'll also show the Chinese government that there will be consequences to interference in the reincarnation process. Let me just conclude by saying the activism of young Tibetans, of young Tibetan Americans, has been critical to these legislative efforts. You have organized lobby days, you have met with members of Congress and their staffs, written letters, emails, and engaged in social media, and I am grateful for your support. So please know that my staff is always available to you. I am always available to you. And I can think of few things more inspiring than the engagement of Tibetan Americans in the democratic process. So thank you for your leadership. And again, I'm just happy to be with you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Congressman, for your words of appreciation, but most importantly for your commitment and relentless work over many, many years. And if I may just make a brief follow-up, you have a long experience as a member of Congress, but also as an activist. You have been engaged on many causes all over the world, from Latin America, from other parts of Asia, etc. So to the people who are watching, who are now in high school, college, is there any advice you would give to them on how, if they want to have an influence, what would be the best way? Being an activist, or maybe going more into the policy making area. If you have any advice, I think people are listening to you because they really trust.
Well, you can be both. You can be an activist and you can be a policymaker. As Ambassador Brownback said, the important thing is being engaged and raising your voice. I always tell people that you have more power than you realize. And even if you are in high school or in middle school and you feel passionately about something, you still have power. You may not be able to vote, but you have family members who can vote. You have friends who can vote, neighbors who can vote. You can use your voice to mobilize your community and put pressure on your elected officials. And here's a little secret. There's one thing that Democrats and Republicans all have in common who are elected to office. We all want to get reelected. And the bottom line is that means we need to be responsive to the pressures of our constituencies. So, raising your voice is important. Putting constructive pressure on elected officials is important. But also think of yourself as teachers. Not everybody knows as much about Tibet and about religious freedom issues as Ambassador Brownback and others. I mean, or as you. I mean, use your voice to educate and raise awareness. I think most people in this country, care about these issues. When you make them aware of things, they want to be part of the solution. I mean, I believe in the goodness of the American people, and I think, if they hear about injustice, even if it's halfway around the world, not just halfway down the block, but halfway around the world, they want to be part of, helping. And so use your power. You have power, and never, ever, 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 ever give up.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these inspiring words. I'll now pass to the four panelists that we have, and I think we begin with Pelkey.
So thank you so much to Congressman McGovern for that, and to Ambassador Brownback for being here. And thank you so much to ICT, Matteo and Thinchla for hosting this. I know it's a difficult time right now for everyone, but the fact that you're continuing this program, which was so beneficial to myself and other young people across the country, is just really heartening right now, especially. So to the young people watching, I hope you have a good experience from this, and please continue to engage because there's so many great programs that ICT has done. And to Ambassador Brownback, my question is, how does the State Department view the legislative initiatives that have been championed by the U.S. Congress? Do they help State Department in their dealing with China?
We view them as very helpful. I used to sponsor some of them, and now I'm in the position of implementing. But these are very helpful, and it tells the rest of the world this is a bipartisan subject that will continue from administration to administration because there's no division on it. They usually pass by very large numbers in the Congress, and it gives extra teeth on these policies, and particularly now as you're seeing this growing discussion and determination of how do we address the issue of the U.S.-Chinese relationship. If China is going to continue to act this way, we're going to more aggressively push back against it. And the Congress is passing laws, and those signed by the president shows the world that this is a united effort on part of the United States to do this. So
I think you have muted yourself, or something happened. We cannot hear you.
There we go.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Just real quick.
We lost just 2 seconds.
I would urge people to do webinars. You guys are all tech savvy, where you get people that have experienced recently the harassment of Tibetans and get them on the internet, and then host a webinar for people to be able to see and hear the actual current experiences. There's just nothing that moves people like a personal experience, and you would have both the connections and the tech ability to do this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Brownback and Representative McGovern, for joining us today, and thank you to ICT for hosting this. My name is Tenzin Rangdal, and I was, as Tenchola mentioned, I was part of the 2015 cohort of the Tibetan Youth Leadership Program. And last year, I was part of ICT's first class of Lodi Gary Fellows, through which I interned on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. My question is specific to Representative McGovern. So you introduced the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act, which was successfully passed and signed into law at the end of 2018. Do you expect that the Tibetan Policy and Support Act will be passed by Congress this year? Thank you.
All right, good. Yeah, so the answer is, I hope so. And yes, I am expecting that it will pass and be signed into law. Obviously, the pandemic that we are now dealing with has obviously limited a lot of congressional action. But we are now figuring out how to operate in case the House remotely. But the Senate is continuing to try to convene, and my hope is that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will very shortly take that up, and it will move to the Senate floor, and it will pass. And if there are differences between the two bills, we will reconcile them in warp speed, and we will get them to the president, which I expect that he will sign it. So I am very hopeful that we will get this through the entire process this year.
Thank you.
Hello? Am I?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Ambassador Brownback, the next question is for you. And first, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank both you and Congressman McGovern for being here, and also to thank ICT for the opportunity. One of the things that ICT has been so successful at over the years has been training and empowering the next generation of Tibetan American youth. So Ambassador Brownback, it's wonderful to see you again. When I last had the privilege to meet you, I was working on the Hill as counsel for Senator Leahy, who is another great supporter of the Tibetan people. And before that, I was at the Justice Department working on national security issues, including many of the issues that are being discussed with respect to China today. So when I was on the Hill, there was a growing concern about the looming threat of China interfering in the reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And of course, this would grossly violate the right to religious freedom of Buddhists, not just in Tibet, but also across Asia and even here in the United States. The atheist Chinese Communist Party, of course, sees its attempt to control reincarnation as part of its political effort to dominate Tibet, and also to exert influence over sort of a Tibetan Buddhist crescent running from the Indian Himalayas to Mongolia and parts of Russia. But as we saw with Beijing's shameful abduction of the Panchen Lama, Tibetan Buddhists will never accept a Chinese appointed Dalai Lama. So now, thanks to the leadership of yourself and Congressman McGovern, who is such a steadfast champion of human rights, both internationally and domestically, and thanks to the work of ICT and others, The US government is now looking at concrete legislation on the reincarnation issue. Really wonderful to see. So the question for you, Ambassador Brownback, is that you traveled to Dharamsala, India, and delivered a speech on the question of the succession of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. To Tibetans, of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama represents everything. What did it mean for you to meet him?
It was special. I had met him several times previously when I was in Congress and when he traveled more frequently around the world. And so I had met and had visited with him, and I'd worked on these issues for some period of time. But to see him there and receiving people, because he had quite a line of people that he received, and I got to watch the interaction that he had with a number of individuals, was really special to see. We had a good conversation afterwards. I told him about the United States, our effort and our absolute position that this right to select this successor does not belong to any government around the world. This belongs to the Tibetan people and the Tibetan Buddhist system that has selected and has had this succession process for a very long period of time. And I was very clear about that. Now, he in his kind of typical fashion is saying, well, he thinks he may outlast the Chinese Communist Party and live to be 120, and was, his kind of view of things. And I hope that's correct. And I want that to be correct. But it was powerful. It's also, though, just very clear China is at war with faith. They just, this atheistic system cannot stand faiths that stand by their own systems and their own ways. And it's just so important for all of us to say this: you must allow faiths to practice freely the way they have for millennia. And I hope we can stand by that. And I'm glad that the legislation's moving forward on this as well.
Thank you. And hello and Dash Delay, everyone. My name is Tenzin Chunju, and Thinchla gave a great brief introduction for myself, and I just wanted to say today I'm here, and I wanted to ask a question to Congressman McGovern. Before I ask the question, I just want to give a brief background. As a Tibetan American who was born in exile in India and then grew up here in the United States, specifically in Minnesota, where we have a very vibrant Tibetan community, I've never seen Tibet myself, and I've never had the opportunity to see Tibet myself. So today, my question to you, Congressman McGovern, is you were able to go to Tibet and see Tibet in 2015. I just wanted to know what your experience was like visiting Tibet, and then what observations did you have on access to Tibet?
Well, that's a good question. I visited Tibet with then Leader Pelosi. She wasn't the speaker at the time. She was the minority leader. And it was an incredible trip. Obviously, the Chinese government was concerned about our visit. I think we were the first congressional delegation in close to 10 years that was granted access to Lhasa at the time, and quite frankly, right up until the last moment, I wasn't sure they'd let us in. But we did get in. It was clear that the Chinese government has a repressive presence in Lhasa. We visited some of the historic sites. They've rewritten history. I mean, there's no indication that the current Dalai Lama even exists. You can't buy a book by him. You can't have a picture of him with you. I think there's concern that the culture and the traditions and the religion and the language is slowly being kind of wiped out. A lot of Tibetans have been displaced and been moved outside of the areas where they were born and raised. And so, why it was a beautiful place to visit, it was also very sad when you see the repression. And we visited a number of monasteries, again, against the desires of our government, Chinese government officials, and many of the Tibetan monks that we interacted with privately pulled us aside and asked us to please pass on their best regards to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And everywhere we went, myself and Nancy Pelosi would begin every meeting with Chinese government officials, not just, by the way, in Lhasa, but when we were in Beijing as well, by saying, that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is our friend, and we hold him in high esteem and we revere him. I guess if the Chinese government's goal is to basically try to erase Tibetan history and culture, they're not succeeding. I mean, people are still, unfortunately, under great threat, trying to be who they are. But the Chinese government, no matter how they try, cannot erase, the religion and language and culture and even the influence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So I pressed when I was there to try to get a U.S. consulate to be open there. They all kind of said that was a bad idea, but look, I've asked them. I've told them. I said they should let His Holiness be able to go back to Tibet, be able to go back to see his people, to see where he grew up, but it's beautiful, but it's sad, and so that visit only reinforced my commitment to being an advocate for human rights for the Tibetan people, and I'm so happy to be allies with so many of you. What you are doing is important work. It's the right work, and so I thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Congressman and Ambassador Brownback. We do have a number of questions that came in from our online viewers. So I'm going to invite one or two viewers to join and share their questions. I know, Ambassador Brownback, you may have to leave at some point, but we'll be most grateful if you stay on also, as there may be one or two questions for you as well, if you do stay. So with that note, from our online participants, we are going first to Tom Jor. Actually, Tom Jor has a question for Ambassador Brownback. So let me get Tom Jor on the screen. Tom Jor, can you turn your camera on and mic on and join us?
Okay, awesome. Hi, Ambassador, Congressman. My name's Dr. Sultram. I'm from Rhode Island. I'm a sophomore studying political economy and English at Williams College. And today, I guess I have the honor to ask Mr. Ambassador this question regarding the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act. So this is a piece of policy that ICT and a lot of us youth in the community in America have worked really hard at. I remember going to lobby days all throughout like middle school and high school, specifically for this act, and we were incredibly overwhelmed with joy when it was passed. My question to you today is, so now the State Department is in charge of implementing the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act, and I wanted to ask you how you guys are going to go about doing that, and what's the current status now that it's in the State Department's hands. Thank you.
Thanks for lobbying for that bill, and thanks for getting it passed, and congratulations to Congressman McGovern for his leadership in shepherding it through. State Department continues to press the People's Republic of China authorities to grant open access to U.S. diplomats, officials, journalists, and tourists into Tibet. State Department released a report last March, concluding that the Chinese government systematically impedes travel to the Tibetan Autonomous Region, and Tibetan areas outside the autonomous region, they're impeded as well. But there was a finding that they were systematically doing this. PRC does not require a permit for diplomats to go, but effectively they are blocked. And we keep a track of those that have been blocked from going as part of this Reciprocal Act. I like this kind of legislation. It's action-oriented and it requires. If they're not going to let us to have access, then there is a consequence on the other side. So we keep close track of it. I would note, though, that our ambassador, Terry Branstad, was able to get into Tibet. I think that was 2019, May of 2019, now over a year ago. And he was the first U.S. ambassador to get in since 2015. So we did get that taking place, but we're going to continue to work on this legislation and track it very closely and put out the reports required by Congress.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We now have, we want to invite another participant online. We have Pasang Wongmo. Pasang Wongmo is joining us from Atlanta, Georgia, and she has a question on China's denial of visas for Tibetan Americans. Pasang Lamo, you can.
Hi. Yes, I can. I can see. Okay. First, I want to thank Congressman and Ambassador for the support for the Tibetan people. My question is sort of a follow-up to the previous one. My situation is this. I was born in Tibet and then came to the U.S. as a refugee. Right now, I hold the American passport, but I got denied visa 4 times. So I'm wondering if the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act covers Tibetan Americans. A lot of Tibetans, including myself, that have been separated from their families inside Tibet and then never got to reconnect. So I want to understand the work regarding this. Thank you.
Who's the question to? Me?
It will be to Congressman McGovern.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is it does. And look, the Chinese government, is not respecting the principle of reciprocity. That is clear. And we are waiting, for the State Department to issue a second report on the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act. It's unfortunately overdue. But even I was always right. The bill does not include average individuals back and forth. But the bottom line is that they are not upholding the standard of reciprocity, and so we need to start putting names on the list. The bottom line is that we cannot expect the Chinese government to respect your rights to be able to travel to Tibet to see family members or friends, at the same time when they're denying access to journalists, to diplomats, to others. And so, I'm going to get him in trouble, but I mean, I kind of wish that Ambassador Brownback were the Secretary of State right now, because I know how strongly he feels about these issues, because I think we need to have a list. We need to start, we need to make it clear that when Congress passed this, it was more than just a statement. That in fact, we meant what we passed. And I think unless China feels that there's a consequence to denying visas, then they're going to continue to do it. They don't want people to see what's happening in Tibet. They don't want people to see the repression. They don't want people to see how they're denying religious freedom to Tibetans. They don't want people to be firsthand witness of what's going on. Now we're getting information that comes out of Tibet all the time, but the bottom line is that we're at the point now where I think we need the administration to actually start naming names, and my hope is that will be forthcoming soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. We've had a few participants sending their questions about Congressman Scott Perry's new bill asking the U.S. government to recognize the Tibet Autonomous Region. The text of the bill is not available yet, but since we have a few questions about it, we want to invite Tenzin Dadak to ask the question. Tenzin Dadak, please unmute and turn your camera on and join us.
Hi, everyone here. Okay, cool. So I'm Tenzin Dadak. I'm from New York, and I'm a high school at the Bronx High School of Science, a junior. And my question was, what is the likelihood of Congressman Scott Perry's proposed bill being passed and the implications it would have in the global sphere regarding like international relations with China or any other countries?
So Congressman Perry hasn't talked to me about the bill. I'm not sure if he's reached out to ICT or to any of the Tibetan organizations about the bill. But you know what I am guided by, and I'm sure what Ambassador Brownback is guided by, is what we hear from Tibetans. I mean, you know, the pathway forward that we're moving in is not, oh, this is a good idea that Jim McGovern had or that Ambassador Brownback had. It is based on our conversations with Tibetans here in the United States and all around the world. You know, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has outlined the middle way. You know, we are, you know, people have different opinions about that, but we respect that, and we are listening to the Tibetan government in exile. So I think it is important that American politicians, you know, listen to the Tibetan community, and that what we are doing reflects the consensus within the Tibetan community. We don't want to be ahead of anybody, or we don't want to be behind anybody. We want to be in sync with the Tibetan community. So, you know, I know he's introduced a number of bills that are similar. I'm not sure if he's going to make a statement, a political statement or not, but, you know, I haven't talked to him about it. He hasn't reached out to us. I don't know if he's reached out to any of you. So I'm not sure how serious of an effort this is. But again, I think for us here, I mean, we ought to be guided by the Tibetan community, period. And if the Tibetan community, you know, decides to change course, then, you know, we ought to, our policy ought to reflect that. But in the meantime, we are listening to Tibetans.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And just to clarify, we haven't seen the text of the bill either. We have reached out to his office, and so we'll see. Thank you.
So with that, we have the end of the questions. But before we close, we wanted to see if you might like to add any closing remarks from Congressman McGovern, Ambassador Brownback. Closing remarks for our youth who are listening over here.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having this. I appreciate the interest and the activism. The Dalai Lama's birthday is coming up in July. This would be a great chance, I think, for people to magnify a voice on this. And I hope people will step up and take that opportunity to really press on these issues and put texture and faces with it. Get people on the line on the internet showing that have recently come out of Tibet. If you can find individuals and connect with them like that to tell about the oppression and the repression that's taking place. I just I want to urge the activism and to not grow weary in it. That's what the Chinese government's counting on, is that people just kind of wear out and you know, and then they win. Well, you're the young legs. We need you to push on these things and to be very active and passionate about it. And I'm glad you're signed up here, and we want to be an ally in that help in any way we can. All the best to your efforts. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador.
And let me just echo what the ambassador said. Look, I'm grateful to ICT. I'm grateful to the ICT's Tibetan Youth Leadership Program, the graduates, and all those who participated here today. Look, for many, many years under Democratic and Republican administrations, you know, our politicians in Washington have kind of talked the talk, but they haven't really walked the walk. And as a result of your activism, I mean, in the last couple of years, we have passed more legislation Tibet specific than, you know, in ever before. You have helped create a sense of urgency. You have helped us focus, and we need that continued pressure so that we continue our advocacy. And look, walking the walk means making sure that we have policies that have a consequence in response to China's repression against the Tibetan people. Our criticisms, by the way, are not against the Chinese people. I mean, it is against the Chinese government. We have respect for the Chinese people. Many of the Chinese people are suffering greatly under the current Chinese government. But our criticism with the Chinese government and their repressive policies. We stand in solidarity with the Tibetan people. We honor and we revere His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We are in this for the long haul. We aren't going anywhere. Again, we expect that legislation will pass that we passed in the House will pass the Senate, and we will get it to the President's desk. We expect the President to sign it. We will work with you on immigration issues as well. The goal of the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act is to basically open up immigration for everybody, including allowing family members to visit each other. So we need to continue to focus on that. But we're not going away. Ambassador Brownback and I, we feel this is a very personal issue to both of us. We feel strongly about this. And so just understand we are there for you. But your activism and your engagement has made all the difference in the world. So we just need to keep it up, and we need to keep members focused and educated on these issues. And if we do that, I'm confident that we'll make even more progress. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and on behalf of myself and all the participants, particularly the youth participants, thank you so much for joining us here today. And thank you for all that you do for Tibet and more broadly for human rights around the world. And especially thank you for ending with a call to action. I'm sure the Tibetan American youth that are on this call will take heed to that and continue to engage and persist for the Tibetan movement.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I'll echo Rangjo's thank you also. And we conclude, this is the end of our for watching. We thank everyone who has joined us online for this program. We'll be back next week with another episode of Tibet Talks. Our guest next week is Sophie Richardson of Human Rights Watch. So we'll look forward to the conversation then. Thank you.